Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I've got quite a tricky question for you now. It does involve the B word. It's astonishing to see Dominic Raab touring the studios again, re-inflating the nonsense that he's been trying to serve up for the best part of 3 years. Genuinely astonishing, because you begin to wonder, I've said for a time actually that this is psychological, not political. I think I'm going to withdraw that observation. I read a brilliant analysis of it by Roland Smith, is his name, who was one of the many people on Twitter that I stumbled across when I was looking for so-called sensible levers. Oliver Norgrove was another one who like Roland, has changed position somewhat subsequently. But he talked about actually waiting for the politics to intervene. So this line about this, because what Raab has said today is that if we crash out with no deal on October the 31st, it will be the EU's choice. Now this, I could be wrong, all right? But why would he be using that language unless it was the preparation for a blame game? And I don't know whether I'm going to be able to explain to you what I want you to ring me with today, because it's curiously complicated, or certainly convoluted. Because the numbers now are pretty stark, actually, on the number of people who voted leave, or indeed the number of members of the Conservative Party who think that they want a no-deal Brexit. I hope you don't find it patronising or condescending. If you do, I'm sorry, you just have to deal with it. But they don't want a no-deal Brexit. They just think they do. Nobody, actually, who understood what it might mean would actively desire it, except people very, very, very heavily invested in the financial opportunities that would arise if our industry, our manufacturing and agriculture industries were to collapse, which is an upshot not just of I think the government's own analysis or impact assessments, but of course of the pocket economist of the ERG, headed up by Jacob Rees-Mogg, a chap called Professor Patrick Mimford, who said in 2012 to a chap called Rory Stewart, of whom we had not heard much at the time, that would be a direct upshot of a so-called no-deal Brexit. I should add that Patrick Mimford was selling it. He was saying, well, yes, that would be collateral damage, that would be the cost, but he was saying it would still be a good thing to do. So the bit that I really want to try and zone in on today is, why would anybody like Dominic Raab be already preparing the ground for blaming the European Union for a no-deal Brexit? Because people like Dominic Raab have successfully persuaded 60% now, I think, of people who voted leave 3 years ago that they want no deal, that they wanted no deal all along, that they believed the people on the Remain side and consciously voted for the people who were calling the Remain side liars, because they knew that the people on the Remain side were actually telling the truth about things like job losses, economic damage, single market, customs union. I told you it was convoluted, but this is our national narrative at the moment, and I think it behoves us to have a look at it, perhaps not quite as often as we... Well, I don't know, as the clock ticks more loudly and the cliff edge looms ever closer, maybe we need to start talking about it more. But I find myself fascinated by the contortions that these people undertake, and as ever more fascinated by the failure of so many members of the public to register that they've been taken for mugs. I don't know if you heard the call yesterday from the chap in Northampton. Again, I said to him, in terms, people will say that people like me think you are stupid or racist or some other horrible insult. We do not. We have nothing but sympathy for you, as he listened to Nick's interview with Boris Johnson and realised that his Brexit vote was built upon the promises and the pledges of a man that couldn't be trusted to lace his own shoes. That is a rarer experience than I thought it would be by now. But it's not unique. And what appears to have happened today, what the new narrative seems to be, is if we crash out with no deal, it will be the European Union's choice, not ours. Now, in the simplest of terms, what Raab is claiming is that having spent 3 years, or not quite 3 years, 2.5 years, working on and putting together a withdrawal agreement with which the British government agreed. So the challenge of the two negotiating teams was to get an agreement in place which 28 governments agreed to. Now, Theresa May's job was to get one parliament to agree to what her government had agreed to. Michel Barnier's job was to get 27 governments to agree to what his negotiating team had achieved. And that simple number right there seems to me to cut to the very heart of all of this. They got an agreement in place that was agreed by 28 heads of state, 28 sovereign heads of state, right? And then one of them couldn't get it past their own parliament. And that was us, which raises the spectre of a Brexit with no deal in place at all. The consequences of which are impossible to fully describe, because one has to hope, possibly even pray, depending upon your religious proclivities, that some of the potential damage could be assuaged, because it would be damage to both sides, make no mistake. It's just a question of scale. So 27 separate governments on one side are ready to go ahead with it. One government on the other, the government of the country that voted to do this. I don't know whether Dominic Raab is aware of the fact that it was the United Kingdom that voted to leave the European Union, not the European Union that voted to kick us out. And I mean, I'm obviously being slightly tongue-in-cheek when I say maybe he doesn't realise that, but this, remember, is a man that didn't realise the importance of the Dover to Calais crossing to our import-export trade until after accepting a job as Secretary of State for leaving the European Union. So 27 countries reluctantly enter into negotiations, because none of them wanted us to leave 3 years ago, although I wouldn't be surprised if a few of them have changed their mind now. 27 countries enter into negotiation, arrive at an agreement which is acceptable to 28 governments. The 28th government takes that agreement to its own parliament and can't get it through. People like Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dominic Raab vote both for and against that withdrawal agreement during its multiple presentations to Parliament. For and against it. They changed sides in the course of those three votes on the withdrawal agreement. But Dominic Raab is telling you today that if we crash out with no deal, it will be the European Union's choice. Now, I would like you today, and this might not work, I might have to come back at you, so if you want to avoid yet another interminable monologue, then ring me and try and answer the question I'm about to ask. Because that seems to me to be, even by Dominic Raab's standards, that is an intellectual contortion of such epic elasticity that I'm worried the poor fella might snap. It will be the EU's choice. So here's the question. In the context of Raab's latest splutterings, if leaving on so-called WTO terms, which again, nobody who understands what that means actually wants it to happen. People who think they want it to happen don't understand what it means. And it's not their fault, because very senior and, quotes, respected people are whispering nonsense into their ears about it. If leaving on WTO terms is both desirable and what 17.4 million people voted for, which is still the claim doing the rounds, right? Why would Dominic Raab already be describing it as the European Union's choice? Now, if I overreach, then tell me. But I think in this context, choice is a synonym for fault, isn't it? If it's such a good thing to do, why would Dominic Raab today be describing it as something that would be essentially inflicted upon us by the European Union? 0345 6060 973. Fill your boots on this, all right? I'm going to clear the switchboard. My apologies if you were waiting to talk about xenophobia and racist scaremongering, although we're moving on to Brexit, so those two things will probably pop up again as well. That's my question to you. And I sometimes say, let's try not to have a scrap about it. I'm not going to say that today. I'm not going to have arguments about whether or not you know more about the WTO than Pascal Lamy, all right, who used to run the WTO. I'm just not. Life's too short. I'm not going to have arguments about whether or not Boris Johnson's got a better understanding of the facts than the Attorney General and the Governor of the Bank of England. We've tried that. It doesn't work. So, if you think it's a good idea, so-called WTO terms, right? I'm not even going to have an argument with you about what it means. I'm just going to accept that you think it's a good idea. Okay? Why is your cheerleader, one of your Pied Pipers, today describing it as the EU's choice, i.e. it will only happen if the EU choose it? When what he's been saying, if I'm right, and if I'm wrong, 0345 6060 what I think has been happening for the last year or so is that he's been telling you, or certainly people on his side of this argument, the ERG side of the United Kingdom, they've been saying for the last year that you chose to leave on WTO terms. And now they're saying that if it happens, it will be because the EU chose to inflict it upon us. Of all the little pivots and pirouettes that these preening chancellors have had to make over the course of the last 3 years, I would cautiously suggest to you this morning that this might actually be the most significant. Because I've said to you all along that when they have to write it down, it falls apart. I said to you at the very outset that getting out of this union would be like trying to get the eggs out of a baked cake. But that line about when you have to write it down, it falls apart, has come back to haunt me today, because the only way in which you can avoid writing down your plan, this is the question Boris Johnson is most terrified of, not how many children have you got, or why did the police come to your girlfriend's flat last week, but what's your actual plan? Let's really pick over it now. The minute they write it down, it falls apart. So no deal allows them to continue claiming that the moon is made of cheese, that the unicorns will arrive tomorrow, that the German car industry won't. Well, they probably can't get away with that anymore. But that's the only way they can avoid writing it down. All of the other unicorns have perished at the altar of reality. And that's what makes it so interesting today, that Dominic Raab is already describing a WTO Brexit, or whatever you want to call it, as something that will only happen if the European Union inflict it upon us or choose it for us. I mean, the most obvious observation to make is that that doesn't sound like taking back control. That sounds like giving them complete control over our future. Have a crack at that for me, will you? 0345 6060 973. If it's what you voted for and it's going to be great, why is Dominic Raab already trying to blame it on the European Union? Or maybe I've got the analysis wrong, and that's not how you've processed these pronouncements and interventions at all. In which case, for the 760 millionth time in the last 3 years, I really hope I'm wrong. And if 17.4 or 13.2 or even just 163 people voted in June of 2016 to leave on WTO terms, which has become the latest narrative, why is Dominic Raab, the former Secretary of State for Brexit and still, of course, a key cheerleader for Boris Johnson, why is he already saying that if it happens, it won't be our choice, it will be their choice? George is in Sheffield. George, what do you think?
Yeah, well, personally, I think we should be leaving on WTO rules.
Yeah, so you think it would be your choice?
Yeah.
So why do you think Dominic Raab is saying it wouldn't be your choice? It would be the EU's choice.
No, 17.4 million people voted for it to leave. We wanted to leave with a no deal. That's what the deal is.
Well, that's exactly the premise of my question. If that were true, why is Dominic Raab already saying that actually if this thing does happen, it would be because the EU forced us into it?
The EU hasn't forced us into it, but the EU
I don't think the EU has forced us into it either, George. So why do you think Dominic Raab is saying that it has?
Because he's a politician and he tells a lot of porkies.
But he's one of the people that said 17.4 million people definitely voted to leave on WTO terms. So in many ways, he's on your side of the argument.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I voted to leave because the EU, they bring in all these rules and regulations, which affects my job.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. I'm a long distance tour driver. I can only do 48 hours a week. over a 17-week period.
Do you drive in other countries?
Yeah, I drive all through Europe.
Oh, so freedom of movement of workers isn't going to affect you then?
No. Like, I've been out, and I bought all my new permits, all my new international licenses, everything ready to go in May,
so
you
needed lots of new international licenses and permits as a result of leaving, but you're leaving because there's too many rules and regulations involved with remaining?
Yeah.
Oh. Anyway, back to the original question. If Dominic Raab, who is one of the most prominent proponents of the position you subscribe to, the idea that 17.4 million people deliberately voted to leave on WTO terms, why is he already saying that it will only happen if the EU choose it?
Because he's trying to please his constituencies in his area, for his people. That he's probably one of the
Esher and Wallington. It's a kind of, I mean, I don't know whether it's remain or leave, but it's not really it's a nailed-on Tory seat. It's not really an answer to my question, because
The thing is,
hang on. The question is, if it's a really good thing to happen, that would be self-evident, right? That would be clear. 17.4 million people are clear that it's a good. They want to leave on WTO terms, because they'll get rid of all those pesky laws and regulations, but they'll have to apply for new permits and licenses. That's why they're doing it. Dominic Raab is one of the champions and one of the leaders now of the Leave movement, and he's already saying that this will only happen if the EU make us do it. Now, just in the context of facts, rather than, lines about politicians not being trustworthy and stuff like that, in the context of facts, why do you think Dominic Raab is saying that the thing you voted for will only happen if we're pushed to it?
Because the EU don't want to renegotiate. They're in a worse
But they never have.
Yeah?
The EU have already negotiated with our government, and they've made it absolutely clear.
The deal wasn't good enough for the British people. The
British people haven't been asked about the deal, George, and you didn't want a deal. Remember when you came on the line, you said you wanted no deal from the start.
Yeah, I want a no deal, but I'm
so
talking
why does it? Why, so what, you can't renegotiate George, you can't renegotiate a no deal that you wanted. No deal means no negotiations necessary at all, George.
Right, but you said the EU, right? They said the EU is going to force us on us, but it's not going to force on us. The EU
I didn't say that. I didn't say that, George. Dominic Raab said that. Dominic Raab said that.
Yeah, but Theresa May came back with a deal from the EU, which wasn't going to get passed through Parliament full stop.
Right. She was
only a puppet master to the big strings. Like the Juncker and all them. She was just a puppet master.
No, she can't be the puppet master, George. I think you mean she was the puppet.
Yeah, but she was the puppet getting killed by the puppet
Well,
master.
anyway, good luck with your new regulations and licences and permits that you need to escape the rules and regulations of European Union membership. I'm pretty sure Esher and Walton would be Remain, actually, so maybe George is onto something. Dominic Raab is now wooing the Remain voters of Surrey. It's a view. Adam's in Thurrock. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I'm a little bit, Dominic Raab saying if we leave on WTO terms, it would because the EU have pushed us into that position, or it's their choice.
Yes.
People don't really understand what the withdrawal agreement entails because of the politics and the policies are too intricate for us to sort of understand. The politicians should know whether or not the withdrawal agreement was a good agreement or a good deal or not. Now,
well, you can't really even go that far, can you? Because some of them voted for it and against it, including quite a lot of the prominent Brexiters and indeed Boris Johnson.
Exactly. Now, because we're totally unaware of whether or not the withdrawal agreement was good for the country or not good for the country.
Well, I don't think we are totally. You mean punters in general? Because I'd go with Boris Johnson on that, actually, and he said it was definitely worse than Remaining. I'd agree with that.
Okay.
It's not as bad as leaving with no deal, but it's worse than Remaining.
Okay, so let's say, for argument's sake, it's worse than Remaining, the deal that Theresa May put forward.
Raab did. Sorry, I'll just clarify. Raab did vote for it. Actually, 30 Brexiter MPs voted for the withdrawal agreement, which again drives a coach and horses through the idea that the politicians know what they're doing.
Well, I think what that does, that just installs a lack of trust in those individuals.
And speaking of lack of trust, just very simply, why is Raab already describing... Because the European Union have been absolutely clear. They're not reopening the withdrawal agreement. They were never going to reopen the withdrawal agreement. He's supporting Boris Johnson, who's still claiming that they will. So when he says if we crash out with no deal, even though they're telling us that will be a good thing, they're already trying to say it will be the EU's fault. Why is that?
Okay, well, let's put it this way. If we can agree that the withdrawal agreement put forward was a bad deal...
For who?
The country, for the UK. Is it not? Is it?
Well, you'd have to ask the 30. You'd have to ask the 30 Brexit MPs who voted for it. I think it's worse than remaining. Boris Johnson thinks it's worse than remaining. All of the economic analysis most of the available economic analysis and all of the government's own impact assessments would argue that it was worse than remaining. But Dominic Raab and his coterie are arguing, irrespective of those impact assessments and analyses, that leaving with no deal is not only a good thing and desirable, but also what 17.4 million people like George, the last lad, voted for.
See, the thing is, I understand exactly what you're saying.
Are you sure?
But I do. But
I'm not sure I do.
The problem I think that the population has is they've got their own opinions on WTO, leave without a deal. Some people want to leave with the deal. Now, if we've established that the withdrawal agreement is worse than staying in the EU.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, hang on. No, I understand what you're saying, but you're missing the fundamental element of my introduction, which is the only way they can avoid writing it down is by punting no deal. So the withdrawal agreement is worse than staying in the European Union. Pretty much everybody agrees if you push them hard enough on that. But there is nothing available that's better than it, except remaining.
Yes, but there isn't anything available better than the withdrawal agreement that's worse than staying in the EU, because the EU won't renegotiate.
Yes.
So because it's worse than staying in the EU, it's obviously.
But then the logical thing to do would be to stay in the EU.
Well, but yes, I understand that.
Good. There's no but. That's it. That's the end of the logic.
But the referendum resulted in the majority.
And every single campaigner for leaving said that we'd get a deal. And that it would be better than membership.
Okay, so we've got the Tory government to blame for putting through such a terrible deal.
No, we've got the people who said that a better deal would be possible to blame for the absence of a better deal, because it was never doable.
Okay, so if it was never doable in the first place, what I don't understand is why it wouldn't be doable.
Well, because of the indivisibility of the four freedoms. You can't have the trading terms that we have now if you're getting rid of the freedom of movement of lorry drivers and all other workers. That was obvious from the minute the red lines were established by Theresa May.
But was it really to do with the free movement of lorry drivers? I thought it was
all workers,
just people,
all workers.
Just people just generally coming into the UK.
No, freedom of movement of workers. The European Union allows us to impose quite stringent rules on the employment circumstances and indeed the financial status of people that come in. We choose not to impose them. That's an independent decision taken by our sovereign government.
I understand that as well. I think so. I understand that.
Well, then, go on, one more, because I'm a bit late for the news.
Sure, sorry. Getting back to why Dominic Raab has said what he said in regards to leaving WTO terms, I think it's purely because the EU won't renegotiate. It's a terrible deal. It's worse than staying in the EU. We've had the referendum. The majority voted to leave. The majority voted to leave
on a good deal that doesn't exist.
But if they can't leave on a good deal...
Then who are you going to blame? The people that told you that we could, or the EU?
No, but the fact of the matter is, if we can't leave on a good deal,
we have to just leave on WTO terms.
There it is.
We're not going to renegotiate.
There it is.
We have to.
There's nothing to negotiate. There's nothing to negotiate. So either you and me and others get cross with the people who told us it would be the easiest deal in human history, the people who told us that they needed us more than we needed them, the people that told us that we'd be able to have our cake and eat it, the people that told us that we'd be prancing over the sunlit uplands, the people that told us that there was no way the German car industry would allow the European Union or the German government to restrict the automotive sales into the United Kingdom, the people that told us there was nothing to worry about in Ireland. You'd either blame them for the fact that no unicorns haven't arrived, or you'd blame the European Union. And that is why Dominic Raab is doing what he's doing. Julie says, could you do a morning covering the real-world effects of no deal? Many people seem to think that very little will change. I'll try. I have already tried, but it is uncertain, you see. You know what the worst-case scenario would be, but you don't know what emergency measures might be put in place to alleviate the worst-case scenarios. I hope George in Sheffield is still listening, the long-distance lorry driver, because Richard Burnett is the chief executive of the Road Haulage Association, and I just, during the break, had a little look for something on that sector in particular. This is only from January, so again, I stress, this might have been superseded by events. I know that last year there was talk of a lottery for long-distance lorry drivers, but Richard Burnett, the chief executive of the Road Haulage Association. So again, I stress, we live in a world where people think Boris Johnson knows more about the World Trade Organisation than Pascal Lamy, who used to run the World Trade Organisation. So it's possible that you think Dominic Raab knows more about road haulage than Richard Burnett does, but he's pretty clear, and this was written in the Express of all places. A no-deal Brexit would be a disaster for business. We have been pressing the government for clarity for our industry since the referendum result without success. Advice from Whitehall has been contradictory and confusing, so hauliers have been left guessing. Firms can't make business decisions with any certainty, and many of our members who do international haulage believe they might be put out of business. Our economy relies on international trade with EU countries, everything from manufacturing to food. Now, George, who we spoke to earlier, and George, if you are still listening, I bear you no malice, my friend, I swear, on all that I hold holy. But you were adamant when you rang in that you'd voted for a no-deal Brexit because you felt, as a long-distance lorry driver, that it compromised your commercial freedoms. Here is the chief executive of the Road Haulage Association describing how many people in your sector, many people who run the businesses in your sector, fear that they will go bust. They will actually go under. He goes on, since the early 1990s, we've got used to simple, hassle-free movement across the channel, but a no deal would put paid to that. We'll see lorries stuck in traffic outside ports and firms wrapped in red tape. Now, look, that is the chief executive of the Road Haulage Association, with the weapons-grade caveat that I might have missed developments in this sector in the last 6 months. But nobody voted for that. 30,000 truckers, potentially, left unable to cross the channel. That's truckers who currently can and do. Now, I don't want to over-egg this particular pudding because it might have been superseded by events I haven't got at my fingertips at the moment. But nobody voted for that. And that's why Dominic Raab is saying, well, if it happens, it'll be the EU's fault. 12 months saying they voted for no-deal Brexit, they voted for WTO terms, and then 3 months before it actually happens, 4 months, July, August, September, October, 4 months before it actually happens, oh, well, if it does come to that, it'll be nothing to do with us. It'll be their fault for maintaining the negotiating position they've had since we told them we wanted to leave. It's astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. Even more astonishing, people still going along with it. And George's central point, of course, was about the Working Time Directive and the fact that the European Union puts limits on how many hours lorry drivers can work in a week. What do you want? More knackered lorry drivers tooling up and down the motorways of Britain. When do you want it? October the 31st, please. Pete's in Dorking. Pete, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Pete.
I was listening to Radio 4 this morning when Dominic Raab was on, and I heard him say that. And he said it twice. the interesting thing is he used exactly the same wording.
Almost as if this is a line that's been written down and agreed upon. Did you see Priti Patel the other day in a studio? Someone took a picture. She actually had it in front of her with the lines highlighted. This is coordinated deception of the British public with pre-agreed lines. She sat there. Sorry, mate, I forgot to go off on one about this earlier in the week, so I'm just going to nick a bit of your time to do it. And she's literally got the bits highlight. I think Tom Watson tweeted a picture of it and said, we've all been familiar with the idea of pre-agreed lines, but it's never been this blatant, transparent and cynical before. But anyway, we are where we are. So you think Rob was also parroting a pre-agreed fig leaf line, unicorn?
Exactly the same wording. It wasn't an off-the-cuff response to a question. It was a pre-prepared statement. And it's obvious their default position is now going to be, if we end up with no deal, which is looking increasingly likely, EU's fault. They've pushed us into this position. So
it's simultaneously what they voted for all along, and also something that's been inflicted upon them by the European Union.
But to me, it's like the parental situation of you walk into a room, you've got two kids, you find one of them with a crayon in their hand who's scrawled all over the wall, and when you say, "What have you done?" they point at the other one and go, "They made me do it."
Yeah.
It's just this constant sort of denial of the facts in front of you, and the fact you can just point at someone else and say, "It's not my fault, it's all down to them." And there's so many people are buying that.
No, you voted. 17.4 million people voted to scrawl crayons all over their sitting room wall.
Yeah, and then blame someone else for it.
It wasn't me.
I don't get it.
No, it's the Shaggy era of politics. It wasn't me. No one takes responsibility for anything. You can even put a photograph that's 6 weeks old through the British media and claim that it was taken on Sunday. It wasn't me. 11:42 is the time. Pete, thank you. Patrick is in Shepherd's Bush. Patrick, what do you think's happening here?
Oh, hi, James. Hello. Thanks for having me on.
Very welcome.
I think that Dominic Raab, he's an ex-corporate lawyer. He is quite candidly writing himself and his group, as it were, an insurance policy, a kind of cover note against the chaos and the mayhem, which I think he knows is going to happen if we crash out with no deal. And also, the other point is...
And it just says it wasn't me. It was them. It was those pesky kids. The big boy did it and ran away.
Yeah, and he's also in the group of people for whom, personally, it doesn't really matter either way. He's a multimillionaire. He was a partner at Linklaters, one of the top law firms in the world. So he's in that category as well.
Yes.
What he's also doing as well is showing this breathtaking insularity, which chimes with his ignorance about the Dover-Calais route, but arrogance. Ivan Rogers made that speech about a year ago now, which nobody ever really talks about, where he said the fundamental perspective that we have to have is that the 27, as you touched on earlier, James, they're negotiating with an entity which is leaving the club. So they're already looking ahead to the days when we are no longer in the EU.
Yes.
It isn't a kind of hissy fit. So 27 heads of status.
I know that, and you know that, and yet there'll be plenty of people listening who just are hearing something completely different, and you have to acknowledge that now, because it explains everything. If we take it back to the gym analogy, do you remember the gym analogy back in the early days of Brexit, when people were... back when we naively thought, Patrick, folks like you and I, that this simple explanation would somehow move the needle, said if you vote to leave the gym, you can't carry on using its facilities. It was that simple. What we're doing now, what Dominic Raab has done this morning, is say, we voted to leave the gym. If we're not allowed to use the facilities anymore, it won't be the fault of the people who told you to vote to leave the gym. It'll be the fault of the gym.
Yes, what's really dismaying is the cynicism behind it all.
Is it cynicism, or is it actually mutton-headedness?
Well, it would seem like Dominic Raab, as I say, he was a high-flying corporate lawyer. He's a bright guy. He's done due diligence on companies day in, day out, year in, year out.
Yes.
He knows what lies ahead. He knows it's rubbish to suggest that the EU27 will just blithely ditch an agreement that's taken them 2 years to negotiate with us.
Well, they've made it...
He knows that.
Yes, he does. Well, or does he, though? Because this is why Roland Smiths... I should get him on the show, actually. I don't know if you follow him on Twitter. He's a fascinating former Leaver.
Okay.
And very informed. And he's coined a phrase about the waiting for the politics. So they just think that the prospect of us leaving with no deal is so terrifying to the European Union that actually, eventually... I mean, it's a hard analysis to sustain, given that we've already asked for extensions... but they will eventually buckle and do the opposite of what they've said all along they would do. Politics will intervene eventually. But that's even more cynical in a way, because they're simultaneously telling people that they voted for this thing while betting the house on the fact that it would never actually happen. And Rob's move today seems to suggest he's beginning to fear that it will.
Yes, but
That's it, we got there.
Yeah, but it's that trace of imperialism and arrogance again. They think, actually, that basically Great Britain trumps 27 European nations.
Yes, of course they do.
We will trump them. And
this is the phone-in I haven't had yet, but I am going to have at some point. Let me just run it by you, Patrick, see if you want to finesse the question or something like that. When all is said and done, when all of the dust has settled, and we're still wrestling with this question, because we'll have to do it before October, what exactly explains your belief that reality is going to change? Or what exactly informs your determination to leave? All I've got left now is a resentment of a system that treats us as equals.
Yes, because if we go the other way, then the whole belief system that I, a Leaver, for example, have built over 40, 50 years, for example, of tabloid propaganda, that will collapse.
Yes.
If I have to be convinced that by reality that actually 27 of the European countries have moved on in the world since the Second World War, that leaves me just crying in the wilderness.
Yes, and they can't do that. I mean, you're right, because it's not about 3 years. It's about 30 or 40 years. It's about entire lives and careers spent in thrall to what has turned out to be a massive myth. And admitting that is simply too hard. But the specifics of what Rob has done this morning remain fascinating, because it appears, by saying, well, if it happens, it would be the EU's fault or the EU's choice, just beginning to contemplate the possibility that, oddly, they're not going to undertake a massive U-turn and go back on what 27 different governments have already agreed to. And he's beginning to get the groundwork in for scapegoating again. I'm going to soften you up for that question in the coming days or weeks. Is there anything underpinning this madness except an implicit or an explicit resentment of the fact that as European Union members, we're equals to Germans and Frenchmen and women and Spaniards and even Portuguese and Greeks? And that is what sticks in the craw of these Second World War revivalists and these sort of imperial nostalgia freaks. I've tried and tried, probably harder than anyone else in the country, to get inside the minds of these people. And that's all I've got left after 3 years of doing it. It is just either by implicit I mean subconscious, a subconscious resentment. Do you know, I remember the first time I met Farage, long before I pulled his pants down in the studio and he had to be pulled out by his PR. It was on a BBC. I'd forgotten about this, actually, but someone sent me a link the other day. And I think it was the first time I framed this phrase, is that I don't understand these people. And I said, it's as if they would rather be on a ship that was sinking, saluting an English admiral up on the bridge, than be in a fleet of magnificent vessels, but having the same status as French and Spanish and German crew members. And I'm doing far too much I told you soing at the minute. But that was about 5, 6, 7 years ago. And that's what underpins it all, isn't it? That's all I've got left. And we will do a phone-in on this. What else is there? Because I think, and I'm probably being a little bit ambitious with this observation, I think I can explain that in a way that wouldn't offend you. Do you see what I mean? I think that you have that view of Englishness where you go, yes, finally he's got it. I don't want to have the same status as a German crew member. We won the war or something like that, or 1 World Cup, 2 World War, whatever it is. I don't want to have the same status as a Greek. Think of any European country that we have historically had pejorative nicknames for. You expect me to have to bunk down on board ship with and insert your sort of vaguely jingoistic pejorative. And that is it. I'd rather be. So that's where we're going now. We're going to sink. But it'll be all their fault. And you will be saluting Admiral Johnson on the bridge as the ship goes down. And for a significant swathe, but by no means all, of the Leave vote, that's actually a positive. So if, like me, you sit here thinking, what is going on in their heads? And some days you let yourself down a little and start calling them names like gammon or mutton-headed or whatever it may be. And you try, because you just presume at some point enlightenment will occur. I think that is it. I think that's been it all along. I think we've wasted 3 years trying to find a more sophisticated or nuanced explanation. Bottom line, right now, 60% of Leave voters, according to the latest polling, but you can insert whatever number you prefer, would rather salute an English admiral on the bridge of a sinking ship than be equal members of a powerful multinational fleet. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm James O'Brien, and I'm going home. I'm only joking. Chantal is in Clitheroe. Chantal, what would you like to say?
Well, first of all, like, full disclosure, I'm a Remainer, and I have little to no time for Dominic Raab.
Yes.
But I suppose if I was trying to kind of be devil's advocate in this, I would say that maybe because he knows that opinion is so hardened against the EU, he's trying to kind of make it look like their idea to give Johnson an out, because he's going to be PM.
There's no maybe about it, Chantal. I think that's exactly what he's doing.
So he's going to be a Prime Minister, and Brexit, as we all know, is complete, contradiction of terms in itself.
Yes.
So if they can make the Leavers believe that a no deal would be their decision, the EU's decision, then Johnson's got a case for saying, I'm not being pushed around by the EU. So maybe they're trying to soften it up for Johnson.
I don't think there's any maybe about it. And this is the but then again, this is the shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and don't lose a single vote principle. If you treat them like complete cretins, then they might let you get away with it. And the evidence at the moment is that they will, because the people who say, still, up until this morning at least, leaving on WTO terms is brilliant. It's also what 17.4 million people voted for, and it's also vastly superior to anything else that was available ever, while also now setting it up for, well, if it does happen, it won't be our fault, it'll be the fault of those pesky foreigners. I mean, it's just a perfectly symmetrical circle now, isn't it? It's a snake eating its own tail.
And that, when it actually comes down to that crunch, because we all know that Boris Johnson is spineless, I think that will give him the ammo where he can say, I'm not going to do what the EU are making us do, this no deal. Maybe we should do something else. And because the Brexit argument's always been so fluid.
Yes, you've gone further than I have then. So you're suggesting that, no, I don't think Raab is doing that. I think Johnson might bite that opportunity off if it comes along and he is in Downing Street. But this is my other theory, Chantal, that if we could somehow persuade Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron to give a joint press conference in which they ordered us to leave with no deal,
yeah, they'd react. They would.
Then all the Brexiters would be outraged, and they'd suddenly run over to the other side and say, "How dare the French and German leaders tell us that we have to leave with no deal? We'll do no such thing. Marc Francois' stepfather didn't fight in the Second World War to be ordered by Angela Merkel to leave the European Union." Raab's not that clever, but Johnson is that opportunistic.
Yeah. So, like I say, probably giving him the benefit of the doubt there, but
no harm in that.
Stranger things have happened in Brexit.
I don't know why. I don't speak to people from Clitheroe very often, but it always, there's a saint, isn't there, Margaret Clitheroe?
Oh, possibly. I've not lived there too long myself.
Well, a bit of local research. Although, if you have a look at Scott Balcony's experiences on Twitter this morning, you could find yourself in the middle of a foul-mouthed Twitter spat, even as a result of doing a little bit of local history. In his case, Uxbridge-based. It's 11:58, and speaking of Uxbridge, I should have gone and done that signings at Waterstones Uxbridge. Because as things stand, I'm going to miss out on the best-selling non-fiction paperback in the whole country this weekend by 200 books. It's too late if you're just thinking of going out and buying 200 to get me over the line. I think, and I haven't quite got my head around this, because I've been number one in the Saturday Times for 3 weeks, number 3 in the Sunday Times for 1 week. But apparently if I'd managed to sell 200 more books in the last week, we'd have been number one in both. It's amazing how quickly you go from being absolutely gobsmacked and delighted that you've got in there at all to actually having the audacity and ambition to be slightly miffed by only being number 2. Anyway, apologies for the digression. Lee's in Greenwich. I can give you 47 seconds, Lee. Don't waste any single one of them.
Right. My one's all about the money. Hello, by the way. Mine's all about the money. So we're rule makers, not rule takers. No, we're not. France and Germany make the rules, as proved on that BBC One programme, 10 Years in Europe. Did you not watch that? Because you've been quite quiet about that, actually. Nothing happens until Merkel shows up, and then she'll go off with whoever's French president at the time, either whether it be Sarkozy, Hollande or Macron. They decide what's going to happen, and then they put it before the other 26 countries at 5 o'clock in the morning. No one can be bothered to really look at it because it's 5 o'clock in the morning. All they want to do is go to bed. And that's how laws get passed in Europe. That's not me making it up. That was Hollande.
You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time is approaching 12 noon, and in the next hour we will turn our attention to either Prince Charles receiving criticism for endorsing homeopathy or Prince Harry receiving criticism for spending £2.4 million of the proverbial taxpayers' money on refurbishing his new gaff. I'm going to level with you. I think you're going to be slightly surprised, if you're kind enough to listen on a regular basis. I think you're going to be slightly surprised by where I stand on both of these issues.